All right, Nick, let's talk about the Alabama Crimson Tide. We all know Coach Saban has gone. And if you look on the outside, if you look at the media, it looks like players are leaving left and right. And people are wondering, where's the talent at Alabama? How is this team going to recover? Can Coach DeBoer really turn things around? And I think people kind of lose sight of just actually how talented Alabama is, the amount of talent on this roster still, the amount of talent they brought in this recruiting and transfer portal cycle, and just what Coach Kalen DeBoer can work this roster with. I think that Alabama is going to be just fine, and I have an article stating that as well. Let's get on into the article and we can talk about it on the other side. This is from over on Bama Hammer, and it says the common theme among members of the media and those wishing for the Alabama football program's downfall is there's no chance for the Alabama football team to survive the transfer portal losses. The losses have been significant. However, this team is still loaded talent wise and has brought in the second ranked recruiting class in the country this season. While at Washington, Kalen DeBoer only coached two 5-star recruits for one season. Next season, his Alabama team will have 11 5-star recruits should things stay the same. The best quarterback Kalen DeBoer has ever had was Michael Penix Jr., who was a 3-star recruit on next year's roster. You got 4-star Jalen Milroe, 5-star Ty Simpson, 4-star Dylan Longren, and 4-star Austin Mack. The same can be said for his best running back was former 3-star recruit Dylan Johnson, who rushed for 1,195 yards in his lone season at Washington. Now he's going to have a 5-star running back in Justice Haynes, 4-star Jam Miller, and 4-star Richard Young. And you can go on down the list at every position. I think wide receiver is probably one of the most exciting positions for the amount of talent he'll have. Defense is going to have so much talent on it as well. I think people lose sight. Coach DeBoer was over at Washington and did a whole lot with a whole little. Now he's over at Alabama and he has so much to work with. He could lose half of Alabama's roster and still have more than he has ever had to work with. He's an incredibly talented coach, and I think people are being way, way too quick to write him off and to say that Alabama is not going to be a threat next year. I think they absolutely will be, and I think Coach DeBoer is going to surprise a lot of people. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this one, but Alabama fans in the comment section below, let us know. Is Alabama's downfall being a little bit over-exaggerated? Let us know what your thoughts are on that in the comment section below. But Nick, what do you think on Coach DeBoer's chances at greatness next year at Alabama?
So obviously, anytime you go through transition period, there's going to be ups and downs as you kind of figure it out and figure out where you're going to be, right? Can anyone really replace the greatest college football coach of all time in Nick Saban? Probably not. That's probably unrealistic and not fair, even though he'll be judged against that criteria. Let's be honest, though, the way college football landscape is, it's different. You no longer have to be in the top 4, right, to make the playoff, to have a chance to win a national title. You could be top 12. And I think that, with the new college football playoff, now the top 12 teams will compete for a chance to win a national title. So that's a situation that actually favors DeBoer because understanding what he is at Washington was a talent maximizer, especially on the offensive side of the ball, especially the quarterback position. Michael Penix Jr., look, he had a great 2-year run at Washington. He put up some phenomenal numbers. But I think it's important to understand that Penix Jr. was not a good football player in the context of being a top quarterback in the country prior to going to Washington. If you look at his career at Indiana, again, 4 seasons, he did have some injuries battling, that he battled through at the University of Indiana. 4 seasons, if you combine all of his passing yards and touchdowns through 4 seasons, it was less than the passing yards and touchdowns he had this past season for Washington, and by a significant margin. So again, did Michael Penix Jr. just suddenly figure out how to be really good at football, or is DeBoer and his staff that he had at Washington really good at maximizing talent? I think probably door number 2 is the more realistic scenario. And because Alabama still has a significant amount of talent and DeBoer is dealing with a lot more talented guys than he had at Washington, I expect this Alabama offense to be dynamic. I think there's one concern could be defensively a little bit. We'll have to see how that shakes out just because that's more of an unknown. But look, DeBoer is a guy who has made incredible an offensive run to a national title game last season. And at Alabama, he's going to have much better players across the board. And one of the things about good offensive minds and good strategic guys, you give them more talent, they get more creative, they score more points, they make bigger plays. A perfect example of this is Lane Kiffin. Obviously, you compare him with his time at Florida Atlantic, and then, of course, he goes, I think before that, he was obviously the offensive coordinator for Alabama, then goes to Florida Atlantic. But you compare his time at Florida Atlantic to versus what he's doing at Ole Miss and what he did at the offensive coordinator at Alabama, he's just scoring points like it's nothing because he actually has talent, right? And I think that's exactly what we're going to see with DeBoer. He has a lot more talent at Tuscaloosa than he had at Washington. And I think the results will be a lot of points for the Crimson Tide. We'll have to see how it works out on defense. But honestly, there's no reason to think Alabama won't be a top 12 team in 2024 and make another run at a potential national title game. I mean, there's no reason to think they won't. I think I agree with you, Miles. I think the concerns in the media are pretty ridiculous at this point.
Yeah, Nick, if you look at the 2024 schedule going down the stretch, I think things are laid out pretty nicely for Coach DeBoer to get this team up to speed before they hit some of their toughest opponents. You look, it goes Western Kentucky, South Florida, Wisconsin, ramping up a little bit into Georgia. So you get 3 tune-up games to get yourself primed and ready to go before you take on Georgia. Then a reset versus Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Tennessee, ramping up against Missouri. Then you face LSU once again. Then you get Mercer. And then you have the 2 tough games at the end of the season as well versus Oklahoma and Auburn. But I think next year's schedule really lines up well, especially those first 3 games to help Coach DeBoer get this Crimson Tide team up and running and on speed until they have to face Georgia. But next year, you will know exactly who you are because it is a somewhat daunting schedule. And after playing some of these top teams all throughout the SEC, you are going to know exactly what you're capable of before the college football playoff starts. So I think that as well is going to be very interesting for the Crimson Tide fans.
And I do think there's one important point to understand here about people hearing about all these transfer guys leaving and stuff like that. Look, sometimes it's about structure and guys not fitting in an offense. It's not like people are like, oh my gosh, Alabama's going to suck now, right? If you look at what the Alabama offensive scheme was before, and then say you're a great fit for that, that's why you came to the Crimson Tide because you thought, hey, I'm going to have this role in this offense. And then a new coach comes in with a different coaching staff with a different scheme. You're like, hey, this isn't going to fit me. I got to go somewhere else. That happens all the time. And it really happens with virtually every program that goes through a change. It's just reality. Just because a guy's a 5-star player and was brought into this system doesn't mean he's going to be a great fit for this other system. So he goes somewhere else, right? That's commonplace. It's just because it's Alabama. We're not used to seeing that because they've been obviously so stable at the head coach position for the last 17 years or so. So what we're seeing in terms of transfers leaving is extremely common throughout college football. And we're seeing a lot of guys come to Alabama as well because they want to fit in DeBoer's structure and his scheme that he's going to have going forward for the Crimson Tide. So again, I think what the way the media handling this is kind of, I think, ridiculous. I think it's a little biased, a little potential Alabama hate creeping in here. I think the Crimson Tide are going to be a good football team this coming season. And look, if you're 10-2 through that schedule, which is very plausible, you're in the final 12, right? And that's exactly where you want to be. So again, I think there's a lot of good things to like about where the Crimson Tide sit right now. I know it's kind of nervous for some Alabama fans, but I still think the future is very bright in Tuscaloosa.